Welcome to the Korean Mafia romance stories. The channel will bring you stories of strong bonds, cultural differences, passionate love, and unforgettable dramatic events. If you love interracial love stories and cinematic storytelling, then this is the place for you. Enjoy listening. Please subscribe to the channel to hear more great stories.
I own a casino in Las Vegas, and in my world people usually avoid looking me in the eye. They lower their gaze, whisper my name carefully, and pretend they do not notice when my security team moves across the floor like silent shadows. Fear has a smell. After years of running this empire, I recognize it instantly. That is why the girl caught my attention the moment she stepped up to the blackjack table. She did not look around nervously. She did not stare at the glittering lights or the mountain of chips stacked beside the dealer. She looked straight at me. When our eyes met, she walked toward my private table as if she had been invited. My guards tensed immediately, but I raised a hand to stop them. Something about her calm confidence made me curious. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with dark skin and sharp eyes that seemed to study everything in the room. Her posture was relaxed, almost casual, as if she had visited 100 casinos before. Then she spoke, not in English, but in perfect Korean. The sentence hit me harder than a gunshot. She said I looked exactly like the man who killed her father. For a moment the noise of the casino faded into silence. The clinking chips, the laughter, the music drifting from the bar all disappeared behind that single accusation. No one spoke to me like that. No one walked into my casino and pointed a finger at my past. I asked her name, keeping my voice steady. She answered without hesitation. Maya Johnson. The name struck something distant in my memory. A file buried in the archives of mistakes and enemies that had accumulated over the years. I let her leave the table without interference. But the moment she disappeared into the crowd, I called my security chief. Within minutes, my people were following her through every camera in the building. By the time she stepped onto the neon-lit street outside the casino, I already had investigators digging through every database we controlled. The report arrived less than an hour later. Maya Johnson was the daughter of a man named Daniel Johnson. 15 years ago, he had worked as a financial analyst connected to our organization. According to every record, he had stolen $10 million from us before vanishing. The story ended the same way in every document. His house burned down during a police raid, and he died inside. The file had been closed permanently. Yet the girl who had just spoken to me should have been dead as well. Daniel Johnson's daughter was listed among the victims of that fire. I stared at the screen, reading the report again. Something about it felt wrong. When my head of security quietly placed a second folder on my desk, my instincts turned cold. The new document contained a financial audit from years ago. One sentence inside it forced me to stand up from my chair. According to the numbers, Daniel Johnson had never stolen the money. I read the audit again slowly, forcing myself to examine every number instead of reacting to the shock. $10 million was not the kind of money that simply disappeared. In my world, every dollar had a trail. Every transfer left fingerprints in some system, even if those fingerprints were buried under layers of shell companies and encrypted ledgers. Yet the document in front of me told a different story. According to the transaction history, the money Daniel Johnson supposedly stole had never left the organization at all. It had been moved through 3 internal accounts before landing in a final destination that made my stomach tighten. The account belonged to a holding company connected to my father, Chairman Lee. For several seconds, I simply stared at the name, waiting for my mind to produce some reasonable explanation. Perhaps it was a mistake in the audit. Perhaps the money had been redirected later. But the deeper I looked into the file, the clearer the truth became. The transaction ended there. The money had not been stolen. It had been reassigned. I called my financial analyst immediately and ordered him to pull the original records from the year. Daniel Johnson disappeared. The man on the phone hesitated before answering, which was already unusual. In my organization, hesitation often meant fear. 20 minutes later, he arrived at my office carrying an encrypted drive and a folder filled with printed statements. We sat in silence while he opened the files on my computer. Line by line, the same pattern appeared. The $10 million had moved through our accounts under the authorization of someone with executive-level clearance. That clearance belonged to exactly two people at the time. My father and me. I knew I had never approved anything like that. The transfer had been signed using my father's authority. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the discovery settle over me like a heavy fog. For 15 years, I had believed Daniel Johnson betrayed us. Every report I had read said the same thing. The man had stolen money and run. When he was found dead in a fire, the case had been quietly buried. Now the numbers suggested something completely different. My thoughts returned to the girl in the casino. Maya Johnson had walked up to me with absolute certainty in her voice. She did not accuse me out of desperation. She spoke like someone who had already decided the truth. That realization made my instincts sharpen. I ordered my security team to locate her immediately, but I did not want them to touch her. I wanted to speak to her myself. It took less than an hour to find her again. She had not gone far. She was sitting alone in a quiet bar 2 blocks away from the casino, calmly drinking water as if she expected someone to come looking for her. When I entered the bar, she looked up without surprise. Her eyes followed me across the room until I sat down at the table across from her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension between us was heavy enough to feel in the air. "You found the records," she said finally in Korean, her voice steady. I did not bother asking how she knew. Instead, I studied her face carefully. There was anger there, but it was controlled, shaped by years of patience rather than sudden emotion. I asked her why she came to my casino. She placed a small flash drive on the table between us and slid it toward my hand. The gesture was deliberate, almost ceremonial. "Because you deserve to know what your family built," she said quietly. Back in my office, I inserted the drive into my computer while she watched from across the room. The files opened slowly, revealing hundreds of documents, shipping manifests, and coded transaction reports. At first, they looked like ordinary logistics records: container numbers, delivery routes, harbor clearance approvals. But as I followed the details, a disturbing pattern emerged. The shipments moved through ports in Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and West Africa before arriving in the United States under the cover of legitimate cargo. Many of the containers listed vague labels, such as industrial materials or textile imports. Yet the payment structure attached to each shipment was far too large for simple goods. I scrolled through more files until I found a document that froze my hands over the keyboard. It contained a list of names, dozens of them. Each entry had an identification number, a nationality, and a coded price. "What am I looking at?" I asked without turning around. Maya's answer came from behind me, calm and merciless. "People," she said. "Human beings." I turned slowly in my chair, trying to read her expression. She did not look satisfied or triumphant. She looked tired, as if carrying this truth had drained something from her. She explained that her father had discovered the network while auditing internal finances for the organization. At first, he believed it was a side operation run by a few corrupt managers. But the deeper he investigated, the clearer the structure became. This was not a side operation. It was a system, a global chain of brokers, transport companies, and buyers hidden behind legitimate businesses. And at the center of it all was the leadership of the organization itself. "My father started collecting proof," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He believed if he gathered enough evidence, someone in power would stop it." I felt a cold sensation spreading through my chest as the pieces aligned in my mind. The missing $10 million was not stolen profit. It was a fund used to move victims across borders without attracting attention. Daniel Johnson had followed that money until he reached the source. My father. The realization struck like a hammer against my skull. Everything I had built, every empire I believed I controlled, rested on a foundation far darker than I ever imagined. I turned back to the screen and scrolled further through the files. The final document on the drive was dated 2 days before Daniel Johnson died. It contained a message addressed to someone named Detective Park. The text was simple and urgent. Daniel wrote that he had uncovered the entire network and planned to deliver the evidence soon. But the message ended abruptly, as if he had been interrupted while writing it. I sat there staring at the unfinished sentence while a terrible possibility formed in my mind. If my father discovered what Daniel Johnson knew, then the fire that killed him might not have been an accident at all. Maya stepped closer to my desk, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen. "Now you understand," she said quietly. "My father did not steal anything. He was trying to expose them." The room felt smaller after Maya finished speaking. I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the unfinished message on the screen while the quiet hum of the computer filled the office. For years I had believed I understood the machinery of my own empire. Every casino, every account, every partnership was something I thought I controlled. But the files in front of me told a different story. The organization had been operating a second business beneath everything I knew. A hidden structure so carefully disguised that even I had never seen it. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of that realization settle in my mind. When I opened them again, Maya was still standing near the desk, watching me with the same calm intensity she had shown since the moment we met. She did not rush me. She simply waited. Finally, I asked the question that had been forming in my mind since the beginning. If her father had discovered the truth 15 years ago, how had she survived the fire that supposedly killed both of them? Maya lowered herself into the chair across from me before answering. Her voice softened slightly, but it never lost its steady control. She explained that the night the fire started, her father had already sensed something was wrong. Someone inside the organization had begun asking questions about his work. Daniel Johnson realized he had been discovered. Instead of staying in the house, he had taken Maya to a friend's apartment on the other side of the city while he returned home to collect the evidence he planned to deliver. The fire happened only hours later. By the time Maya and her father's friend saw the smoke on the news, the building was already gone. Authorities announced that both Daniel and his daughter had died in the blaze. Maya's voice paused briefly as she described that moment, but she continued before the silence could grow too heavy. Her father's friend understood immediately what the fire meant. Someone had tried to erase the evidence and everyone connected to it. If the organization learned Maya was alive, she would become the next target. For years she lived under a different name, moving from place to place while the friend who protected her slowly pieced together the information her father had left behind. The flash drive she gave me contained everything Daniel Johnson had managed to gather before he died. Shipping routes, financial records, names of intermediaries and buyers. It was enough to reveal the shape of the network, but not enough to bring it down. They needed one more piece of proof. They needed someone on the inside who could confirm the leadership behind the operation. Maya looked at me when she said that, her expression unreadable. That was why she came to Las Vegas. She wanted to see whether the son of Chairman Lee knew what his father had built, or whether he had chosen to ignore it. The question lingered in the air between us. I stood up from the desk and walked toward the window overlooking the casino floor. Thousands of lights flashed below, reflecting off the polished tables and marble walls. To the people gambling beneath those lights, this place was nothing more than a playground for money and luck. They had no idea that somewhere in the shadows behind these walls, people had been traded like merchandise. I tried to remember the last time my father and I had spoken about the deeper side of the business. The truth was that he had always kept certain operations separate from me. He told me it was necessary for security, that the less I knew about certain channels, the safer the organization would be if anything went wrong. At the time I accepted that explanation. Now I realized how convenient it had been. I turned away from the window and looked back at Maya. "Why tell me this now?" I asked quietly. "You could have gone to the authorities years ago." She shook her head slowly. She explained that her father had already tried that path once. The detective he contacted had believed him, but before the investigation could move forward, the evidence disappeared and the case was buried under political pressure. The network was too powerful, too connected to powerful clients and investors who would never allow the truth to surface. Without someone inside the organization confirming the leadership behind the trafficking routes, any accusation would be dismissed as speculation. Maya had spent years watching from a distance, waiting for the moment when she could approach the one person who might change that equation. Me. I felt a strange mixture of anger and clarity forming in my chest. Anger at my father for hiding something so monstrous beneath the empire I had spent my life managing. anger at myself for never questioning the parts of the organization I was told to ignore. Yet beneath that anger was something colder and sharper. A sense that the truth had already set events in motion that could not be undone. If the network existed the way the files suggested, then every day it continued operating meant more people disappearing into that system. I asked Maya what she expected me to do. Her answer came without hesitation. She wanted me to help finish what her father started. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated on the desk. The call came from an old contact whose name I had not seen in years. Detective Park. I answered slowly while Maya watched my face. The voice on the other end sounded older, heavier with time, but I recognized it immediately. Park said he heard rumors that someone had reopened the Johnson case. He told me there were things about Daniel's death that never made sense. Details he could never prove, but had never forgotten. Then he said something that made the room feel suddenly colder. 15 years ago, the last message Daniel Johnson sent before he died contained a list of names. Park had memorized the final one before the file disappeared. The name at the end of that list was not Chairman Lee. It was mine. The name echoed in my mind long after Detective Park ended the call. For several seconds, I remained frozen with the phone still pressed against my ear, listening to the empty silence of the disconnected line. When I finally lowered the phone, Maya was studying my face carefully, as if she could already sense that something had shifted. I repeated Park's words slowly, almost mechanically. 15 years ago, Daniel Johnson had written a list of names connected to the trafficking network. The last name on that list was mine. Maya did not react immediately. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not with accusation but with calculation, as though she were weighing the possibility that everything she believed might be incomplete. At first, the idea seemed impossible. 15 years ago, I had not even been fully involved in the leadership of the organization. My father still controlled every major operation, while I managed smaller financial divisions under his supervision. Yet the more I thought about it, the more a disturbing memory surfaced. There had been a meeting around that time, a late-night conversation in my father's office where he insisted that certain accounts be moved under my authority. He told me it was a sign of trust, a way to prepare me for the future of the empire. I remembered signing the authorization forms without studying them closely. At the time, it felt like a promotion. Now I wondered whether it had been something else entirely. My name may have appeared in Daniel Johnson's investigation, not because I was involved, but because my father had used my authority to shield his own transactions. Maya listened as I explained this possibility. When I finished speaking, she walked slowly toward the desk and looked again at the files displayed on the monitor. "If that is true," she said quietly, "then your father turned you into the perfect cover." Her words carried no accusation, only a harsh kind of logic. From the outside, any investigator would assume the financial transfers belonged to me. My name on the documents would direct suspicion away from Chairman Lee, while leaving me exposed if the operation was ever discovered. For the first time that night, I felt something deeper than anger rising inside me. It was betrayal, cold and undeniable. My father had not only built a hidden empire beneath my own, he had also prepared me to take the fall for it if the truth ever surfaced. The realization settled into my mind with painful clarity. If Maya's evidence and Park's memory were both accurate, then Daniel Johnson had uncovered the structure of the trafficking network and traced the financial path straight to the accounts my father placed under my name. Daniel must have believed I was the architect behind the entire operation. That explained the message Maya remembered from her childhood, the one her father repeated again and again before the fire. He told her the man responsible for everything was the son of Chairman Lee. In Daniel's final moments, he believed he had identified the monster behind the network. And that monster was me. I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and grim understanding. From Daniel's perspective, the evidence would have looked undeniable. Maya watched my expression carefully as these thoughts unfolded. "My father was wrong about you," she said after a long pause. I shook my head slowly. "No," I answered. "He followed the evidence he had. In his position, I would have believed the same thing." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet tension between us carried the weight of a dead man's misunderstanding and the damage it had caused. Finally, Maya asked the question that truly mattered. So what happens now? I walked back to the desk and looked again at the files on the screen. The information Daniel Johnson collected was powerful, but it was still incomplete. If we exposed it without direct confirmation from inside the organization, my father's lawyers and allies would bury the accusations before they ever reached a courtroom. "We finish what your father started," I said quietly. The words surprised even me as I spoke them. For most of my life, loyalty to my father had been a rule I never questioned. Now the choice stood clearly in front of me. I could protect the empire he built and allow the trafficking network to continue operating. Or I could destroy the foundation of my own family to end it. Maya did not respond immediately. Instead, she searched my face as if trying to decide whether she could trust the conviction in my voice. Finally, she nodded once. "Then we need proof no one can erase." Over the next several hours, we examined every document on the flash drive and compared them with the internal records stored in my private servers. Slowly, the full structure of the network began to emerge. Cargo shipments moved through legitimate trading companies that secretly belonged to Shell. Corporations controlled by my father's partners. Victims were transferred between countries using falsified immigration documentation, then distributed through hidden channels connected to high-end casinos, private clubs, and luxury resorts. The deeper we looked, the more horrifying the pattern became. Every part of the operation was designed to appear like ordinary commerce. Money flowed through dozens of businesses before reaching the central accounts that financed the entire system. Near dawn, we finally discovered the connection we needed. One of the internal ledgers contained authorization codes that only my father could generate. Each shipment required a final approval number before leaving port, and those numbers matched the encrypted signatures in his personal account system. Maya leaned forward when she saw the match appear on the screen. "That is it," she said quietly. "That is the proof." I nodded slowly. With those records combined with Daniel Johnson's files, we finally had evidence strong enough to expose the entire network. But revealing it would require confronting the man who built it. 2 days later, I arranged a private meeting inside the executive conference hall of my casino. The room was large, silent, and lined with glass walls overlooking the city. My father arrived exactly on time, dressed in the same dark suit he always wore to important negotiations. He looked at me with mild curiosity as he sat down at the head of the table. For a moment, we spoke about ordinary business matters, the way we had done for years. Then I activated the large screen behind him. Images from the files began to appear one after another. Shipping manifests, financial transfers, lists of names and identification numbers. My father's expression did not change at first. But as the evidence continued to fill the screen, the calm certainty in his eyes slowly faded. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. I did not answer the question. Instead, I placed the final ledger on the table and turned it so he could see the authorization codes. The room fell completely silent. After a long moment, my father leaned back in his chair and studied my face with a look I had never seen before. It was not anger. It was disappointment. "You should have left this alone," he said calmly. I took a slow breath before replying. "You should never have built it." For the first time in my life, the distance between us felt absolute. Outside the conference hall, the city lights of Las Vegas burned brightly, unaware that the empire controlling half its shadows was about to collapse. My father looked at the screen for a long time without speaking. The silence between us stretched across the conference room like a storm that had not yet broken. For most of my life, I had believed that nothing could truly shake him. Chairman Lee had always carried himself with the calm certainty of a man who controlled every outcome. Yet the evidence displayed on the screen behind him was something even he could not dismiss. Container numbers, financial trails, encrypted approvals. Every piece of the network connected directly to him. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands on the table, studying me carefully as if trying to understand the man sitting across from him. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm but heavy with disappointment. He said I had just destroyed everything our family spent decades building. I answered quietly that the empire he was protecting was built on the suffering of people who had never even seen this city. He shook his head slowly, almost like a teacher correcting a stubborn student. According to him, the world had always worked this way. Power belonged to those willing to control what others refused to see. He claimed the network was simply another business hidden behind the illusion of respectability. Casinos, shipping companies, private clubs, all of them were part of a system where money erased morality. Listening to him speak felt like watching a stranger wearing my father's face. The man who raised me had always preached discipline and loyalty. But now I realized those lessons had been designed to protect something far darker. I told him that the system ended tonight. For the first time, his expression hardened. He warned me that exposing the operation would destroy our family name and everything connected to it. I replied that the name had already been destroyed the moment those containers began carrying human lives instead of cargo. Before he could respond again, the doors behind him opened quietly. Federal agents stepped into the conference hall accompanied by investigators who had been waiting nearby for my signal. Maya stood near the entrance with Detective Park beside her, both of them watching the scene unfold in complete silence. My father turned slowly in his chair as the agents approached the table. For a brief moment, the old authority returned to his voice as he demanded to know who authorized the intrusion. One of the agents calmly placed a warrant on the table in front of him. The charges listed on the document were long enough to fill half the page. Human trafficking, organized crime, international smuggling. My father looked down at the paper, then back at me. In that instant, I saw something I had never seen in his eyes before. Not anger, not fear, something closer to realization. He stood without resistance when the agents placed him under arrest. As they guided him toward the door, he paused briefly beside my chair. His voice dropped low enough that only I could hear it. He said I believed I was saving the world, but all I had really done was destroy my own blood. I did not answer him. I simply watched as the agents led him out of the room and down the long hallway of the casino that had once been the center of his empire. The doors closed behind them with a quiet final sound. Weeks later, the investigation spread across multiple countries. Dozens of shipping companies were seized. Hundreds of victims were located and rescued from facilities hidden behind legitimate businesses. The casinos connected to the network were shut down while authorities dismantled the financial channels that supported the entire operation. My own position in the organization vanished overnight. The empire my father built collapsed piece by piece under the weight of the evidence he believed no one would ever uncover. One evening I stood beside Maya at a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of the city. She placed a small bouquet of white flowers on a grave marked with the name Daniel Johnson. The wind moved softly through the trees as the sun disappeared behind the horizon. After a moment, she asked if I regretted what happened. I looked at the name carved into the stone and thought about the man who died trying to expose the truth. Then I shook my head slowly. For the first time in my life, the world felt brutally honest, stripped of the lies that once protected it. I told her that her father had not died because he stole money. He died because he tried to save people no one else cared about. And in the end, the truth he left behind was stronger than the empire that tried to bury it. The casino empire is gone now. The lights still shine over Las Vegas, but the shadows behind them are no longer controlled by the Lee family. Hundreds of victims were freed, and the truth Daniel Johnson died protecting finally reached the world. As for me, I lost the power, the fortune, and the name that once defined my life. Yet for the first time, I can stand in the daylight without wondering what darkness built my success. Maya once asked if justice could ever repay what her father lost. The truth is, some debts can never be repaid. But sometimes exposing the truth is the only justice the world will ever see. If this story made you think, tell me in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Would you protect your family or reveal the truth no matter the cost? And if you enjoy powerful stories like this, do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story.